Picture this. You are a Russian citizen living in Moscow, the most protected, most resourced, most politically important city in the largest country on the face of the earth. A country that sits on the second largest proven oil reserves in the world. A country whose economy has been built on petroleum for 100 years. A country whose president has spent 4 years telling you that everything is fine, that the special military operation is going according to plan, that sanctions are not working, and that Russia is stronger than ever. Now picture yourself in your car. You have been driving for 2 hours. You have stopped at 5 different gas stations. Every single one of them has a sign, no fuel. You sit in your car on the side of a Moscow street, engine off because you cannot waste what little you have left in the tank, and you open your phone to post a video about it. But the app you want to use, Telegram, has been blocked by the Kremlin. So you are shouting into a void, in a country whose government has banned protests, banned solo pickets, banned public dissent of any kind, and you cannot even fill up your car. This is not a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. This is Russia, right now, today, July 1st, 2026. And it is not just Moscow. It is not just one woman in one car on one street. Right now, fuel shortages are confirmed and documented across at least 56 of Russia's 83 administrative regions. That is more than 2/3 of the entire country. From the Baltic exclave of Kaliningrad in the west to Irkutsk in eastern Siberia, a distance of roughly 4,500 kilometers. Russians are waiting in lines that stretch around city blocks, sometimes for 10, 12, 15 hours, just to put gasoline in their cars. In the Kursk region, police have started arresting what officials are now calling gasoline scalpers, people who fill up spare tanks whenever they find fuel, and then drive around selling it at 4, 5, and 10 times the normal price to desperate drivers who have no other option. In the Omsk region, authorities capped purchases at 40 liters per car. In Saratov, 30 liters. In Irkutsk, the governor switched to what he himself described as manual mode, personally setting fuel allocations for each individual recipient, one by one. In occupied Crimea, fuel sales to ordinary citizens were not rationed. They were stopped entirely. The Russian-installed governor told residents fuel was now reserved exclusively for state services. A Russian woman waited at a gas station for a day and a half. Not in line. Sitting in her dead car, engine off, waiting for a fuel truck to arrive. She had been in line when the station ran dry the first time. Her car had no fuel left to drive away. So she stayed, sitting there, hoping. A man in St. Petersburg filled up his Mercedes at a station that had fuel. A few blocks later, his engine seized. Russia is now allowing the production and sale of Euro 2 standard gasoline, a fuel grade considered unsafe for modern vehicles, to try to compensate for collapsed refinery output. His car, like hundreds of others, was destroyed by the gasoline his own country sold him. A truck driver somewhere in rural Russia filmed himself abandoning a 50-ton load in the middle of a road. He could not find diesel. He could not deliver. He could not even drive his truck to a safe location. He just left it there on the roadside and walked away. Farmers across multiple Russian regions are now posting videos saying they cannot run their machinery. Without diesel, combines do not move, fields do not get harvested, and if the harvest does not happen this fall, Russia faces an agricultural crisis stacked directly on top of its energy crisis, on top of its economic crisis, on top of a war now entering its 5th year. And here is the most staggering part of all of this. Vladimir Putin addressed the fuel crisis publicly. He sat down for a televised interview. He was asked about the gasoline shortages Russians are experiencing, and he read from a teleprompter, not conversationally, not from memory. He read prepared statements written by someone else, read aloud by the president of Russia in an interview format, while the gasoline lines in his own capital city stretched around the block. What he read was this: gasoline reserves stand at 1.7 million tons, almost exactly what they were at the same time last year, with only a slight decrease of 4%. Nothing to worry about. Everything is being handled. The companies are proving themselves reliable partners for the state. Putin then personally promised to fix the fuel crisis. The videos of the gas lines kept coming anyway. Because here is the truth that no teleprompter can cover. Russia is one of the biggest oil exporters on the planet. It is swimming in crude, and it cannot get gasoline to its own people because Ukraine has been systematically burning down the refineries that turn that crude oil into fuel. And now, after 4 years of being told this war was not their problem, 140 million Russians are discovering very personally, very viscerally, very angrily that it absolutely is. To understand why Russia cannot simply pump more oil and solve its own gasoline problem, you need to to understand the specific and deliberate campaign Ukraine has been running against Russian energy infrastructure, and why it has been so effective at creating exactly the crisis Russians are now experiencing at the pump. Crude oil and gasoline are not the same thing. Russia has enormous crude oil reserves and significant production capacity, but crude oil is not something you put in a car. Before crude oil becomes the gasoline or diesel that goes into vehicles, machinery, trucks, planes, ships, and military equipment, it has to go through a refinery. Refineries are large, complex, expensive industrial facilities that take years to build and require specialized components to maintain and repair. They cannot be easily replaced. They cannot be quickly fixed. And when they burn, they stay broken for a long time. Ukraine figured this out, and for the past year, Ukrainian drones and cruise missiles have been systematically setting Russia's refineries on fire, one by one, faster than Russian repair crews can fix them. The Slavyansk-na-Kubani refinery in Russia's Krasnodar region is the most recent high-profile example. This single facility processes close to 100,000 barrels of crude oil per day. It is one of the most important fuel suppliers to occupied Crimea. Ukrainian drones struck it on the night of June 27th, and the resulting fire burned for 2 days. Satellite images showed a smoke cloud so thick and so wide that the refinery itself was completely invisible underneath it. The air around the facility became toxic. Residents were warned not to go outside. And as of the recording of this script, that refinery's operational future remains deeply uncertain. But Slavyansk is not alone. The Moscow oil refinery in the Kapotnya district, located just 15 kilometers from the Kremlin, was struck by Ukrainian drones twice in June 2026 alone. On June 16th and again on June 18th. The second strike was described by Russian media as one of the most intense drone attacks on Moscow since the beginning of the war. Analysts now say this facility will not return to operational status until at least the end of 2026. A separate major Moscow area refinery may remain offline until 2027. The Tatneft refinery in Nizhnekamsk, Tatarstan, was hit on June 12th. The Potapskaya oil depot in Krasnodar, one of the primary logistics arteries feeding Russia's Black Sea Fleet and its southern front, was turned into a fireball by precision Ukrainian drone strikes. Fuel transport facilities at Port Kavkaz in Krasnodar and oil depots in occupied Kerch in Crimea were struck in the weeks before that. The Titan Barakady manufacturing plant in Volgograd, which produces launcher systems for Russia's Iskander and Yars strategic missile platforms, was hit by Ukrainian Flamingo cruise missiles. Even the Vladimir region's Vtorovo oil pumping station, which supplies fuel directly to Moscow and Baltic Sea export ports, was struck by Ukrainian drones. According to Reuters estimates cited by multiple outlets, Ukrainian strikes have knocked out approximately 1/6 of Russia's total refining capacity. By other estimates, gasoline production in 2026 is running roughly 10% below 2025 levels. The Moscow Times reported that chains operating at least 7,000 of Russia's approximately 29,000 gas stations, roughly 1 in 4, have implemented sales caps. Russia's own Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak confirmed the government was weighing a total ban on diesel exports, on top of an already existing ban on gasoline and jet fuel exports, specifically to prevent domestic shortages from getting worse. Russia is also burning through its air defense missiles, trying to stop these drone attacks, and losing that battle mathematically. Ukraine's drone force has destroyed nearly 200 Russian air defense assets since the start of 2026 alone. 31 of those were destroyed in June alone. Russia produces approximately 15 to 20 air defense systems per month. Ukraine is destroying 1 to 2 per day. The math does not close for Russia. Every Pantsir system Ukraine destroys makes the next drone strike easier. Every S-400 battery that runs out of interceptor missiles and cannot be quickly resupplied is one less layer of protection over the next refinery on Ukraine's target list. The campaign against logistics has been equally brutal. Since early May, Ukraine has destroyed over 800 Russian supply trucks on key logistical roads. These are not frontline vehicles. These are supposed to be operating on safe supply routes far from the fighting. Drones are hunting them anyway, and the fuel cars attached to Russian military trains are being hit as well. In one piece of footage that circulated widely, a Russian gunner, mounted on a vehicle and assigned to protect a fuel truck convoy, was spotted by a Ukrainian Hornet drone, targeted and destroyed within seconds. The escort system designed to protect those convoys is itself becoming a target. Belarus contributed an unexpected development that has also disrupted Russian strike capabilities. The relay towers Belarus had been operating to help guide Russian Shahed drones toward Kyiv were shut down, and since that shutdown, large-scale drone attacks on the Ukrainian capital have effectively stopped. Russia appears to be recalibrating its drone systems to operate without those relay signals, but in the short term, the loss of that infrastructure has degraded one of Moscow's key attack capabilities at exactly the moment Ukraine is escalating its own. What Ukraine has done, piece by piece over many months, and now with dramatically increased intensity, is not just blow up infrastructure. It has broken the supply chain that turns Russian oil into Russian fuel and gets that fuel to both the military and the civilian population. And the result is now visible at every gas station across 2/3 of the largest country on Earth. Numbers and maps tell one version of this story. But the version that matters most right now, the version that is actually shaking Russian society in ways that 4 years of battlefield losses never did, is the human one. And it is playing out in gas station lines, in car engines seized by bad fuel, in fistfights at the pump, and in conversations that would have been unthinkable in Putin's Russia just 1 year ago. Start with the lines. In city after city, Russians are waiting 10, 12, 15 hours just to buy gasoline. In Moscow, a woman filmed herself visiting her 5th gas station in a single day, finding nothing at any of them. In another video that spread rapidly on Telegram, a woman explained she had been in line at a station when it ran dry. Her car now had no fuel. She had no way to leave. So she stayed, sitting in her dead car at the front of the line, hoping a delivery truck would eventually arrive and that she would still be there when it did. She waited for a day and a half. The scarcity has turned Russians against each other in ways that are both deeply sad and deeply revealing. A man accused a woman of cutting in the gas line. Rather than argue verbally, he pulled out a knife and slashed her tires. At other stations, fights have broken out at the pumps. Fist fights over gasoline. In a country that is supposedly winning a war and has no reason to worry about fuel. The black market is booming. Gasoline scalpers, a phrase that previously had no meaning in Russia, are now a documented social problem serious enough that regional police departments are actively hunting them. These are people who fill up extra tanks and cans whenever they can find fuel, then drive around selling it to desperate drivers at 4, 5, and 10 times the normal price. The Kremlin-connected platforms Avito, Ozon, and Wildberries have started blocking advertisements for the resale of gasoline after the practice became widespread enough to be visible on mainstream shopping sites. Then there is the quality problem, which may ultimately be the most damaging development of all for ordinary Russians. Because the refineries that are still operating cannot keep up with demand, Russia has authorized the production and sale of Euro 2 standard gasoline for a 1-year period. Euro 2 is a fuel grade that was phased out in most of the world decades ago because it is considered unsafe for modern vehicle engines. It is a lower quality blend that does not require deep oil refining, meaning damaged refineries can produce it more easily. What it also does is destroy engines. Russians are now pulling up to the few stations that still have fuel, filling up, driving away, and watching their engines fail. A man in St. Petersburg filmed his Mercedes losing power within minutes of filling the tank. The engine was destroyed. The gasoline his own country sold him killed his car. The cargo transport sector is seizing up. A Russian truck driver posted a video of himself abandoning a 50-ton load in the middle of a road after failing to find diesel. He could not deliver his cargo. He could not drive his truck to safety. He left it where it was. Across Russia, truckers are making the same calculation, and deliveries are not happening. Russia's fuel crisis is disrupting cargo transport to China and driving freight costs upward because the last leg of any delivery, the truck leg, requires diesel that increasingly does not exist at the pump. For farmers, the timing is catastrophic. Agricultural machinery runs on diesel. Combines, tractors, irrigation equipment, all of it needs fuel that Russian farmers cannot reliably access right now. Multiple Russian farmers have posted videos explicitly saying they cannot run their machinery. The harvest season is approaching. If the diesel shortage persists through summer and into fall, crops will go unharvested. Russia's agricultural output, already under strain from years of sanctions affecting equipment parts and supplies, faces a potential collapse that would compound every other pressure the economy is already absorbing. And then there is the conversation happening in the gas lines themselves. Russia has banned protests. Solo pickets are illegal. Public gatherings of any kind for political purposes carry the risk of arrest. But you cannot ban a gas line. People standing together for 12 hours waiting for a fuel truck have nothing to do but talk to each other. And what they are talking about has been documented by Russian journalists and shared despite censorship. They are saying, loudly enough for people around them to hear, "What the hell do we need Crimea for? What the hell do we need these Ukrainians for who are causing us all of these problems?" That sentence is extraordinary in the context of Putin's Russia. Not because it is anti-war precisely. The people saying it are not suddenly pro-Ukraine. They are frustrated Russians looking for someone to blame. And the Kremlin's propaganda has been so effective that many are blaming Crimeans and Donbass residents for dragging Russia into a conflict. But the fact that any version of this conversation is happening openly in public spaces, in a country where such sentiments have gotten people arrested and jailed, tells you something important. The gasoline crisis has created the one thing 4 years of military casualties never managed to create among ordinary Russian civilians: a reason to talk, a reason to be angry, and a reason to ask out loud whether any of this was worth it. Putin promised to fix the fuel crisis personally. The lines kept forming, the pumps kept running dry, and the videos kept spreading on the very platform his government blocked. The gasoline crisis is the most visible symptom of a much deeper economic illness, and the numbers coming out of Russia right now, from Russian institutions and independent international analysts rather than from Ukrainian intelligence claims, tell a story of a country whose financial architecture is under historic strain. Begin with the foundational number. In the first quarter of 2026, the Russian economy contracted, an economy that Putin has spent 4 years insisting was thriving, adapting to sanctions, and proving Western predictions of collapse wrong, actually shrank, a contraction. At the same moment, Russia is spending at wartime levels on weapons, personnel, and military operations across a 1,000-mile front. Oil and gas revenue, the income that has funded Russia's government and its war machine throughout this conflict, dropped by nearly 50% in the first 2 months of 2026 compared to the previous year, hitting its lowest level in 5 years. This is the direct financial consequence of what Ukraine has done to Russia's refinery network. Damaged refineries produce less refined product. Less refined product means lower export volumes. Lower export volumes mean less revenue. Less revenue means less money for the budget, for the war, for everything. Russia's National Welfare Fund, the reserve account Putin has drawn on repeatedly to cover budget shortfall throughout the war, is depleting at an accelerating rate. Every month of continued fighting at current intensity costs more than the fund can sustainably cover. Meanwhile, interest rates have climbed to 16.5%, making credit expensive for businesses and individuals alike, while inflation remains in double digits, eroding the purchasing power of every ruble Russian citizens earn. January 2026 brought a new round of tax increases stacked on top of all of it. Russia tried to solve part of its export revenue problem by banning gasoline exports to keep more fuel available domestically. Then it extended that ban through July 31st. Then it banned jet fuel exports. Then Deputy Prime Minister Novak publicly stated the government was considering banning diesel exports as well, which would represent a dramatic escalation of economic self-harm in the service of preventing domestic shortages from becoming even worse. Russia, one of the world's top 3 energy exporters, is banning its own energy exports to try to keep fuel in its own cars. The situation has become strange enough that Russia turned to Kazakhstan for help. Moscow, the country that for decades positioned itself as Central Asia's dominant energy patron, supplying refined products to smaller neighboring nations, is now approaching Kazakhstan as a buyer. Russia needs to import gasoline from a country it used to supply. This is not a minor humiliation, it is a structural inversion of a regional relationship that has defined Russian influence in Central Asia for generations. And the airline industry is quietly collapsing in the background. A fifth of the operational fleets of Russia's largest airlines have been grounded, not decommissioned, grounded, sitting idle because sanctions have made it impossible to obtain the spare parts and maintenance equipment needed to keep them airworthy. Western aviation companies no longer supply Russia. Replacement parts from sanctioned supply chains do not arrive. Planes that need maintenance stay on the ground. For a country spanning 11 time zones where air travel is often the only practical way to cover enormous distances, a grounding of this scale has cascading effects on business, logistics, and ordinary life. Russia compounded its own intelligence problems in the most farcical way imaginable this month. Yandex, Russia's equivalent of Google, operates its own maps service. The Russian military asked Yandex to blur all military installations from their map images to protect operational security. Investigators from 4 different countries then did the obvious thing. They looked at what was blurred. Any location that Yandex had deliberately obscured and that did not match any known public facility was, by definition, a previously previously unknown military site. Reporters matched the blurred locations against high-resolution commercial satellite imagery and identified airbases, shipyards, and nuclear weapons storage facilities that Russian officials had never publicly disclosed. Russia used its own maps to reveal every secret military installation it was trying to hide. There is also the matter of a Russian war veteran who filmed a video threatening an armed revolt unless given a live television audience with Putin to discuss widespread abuse in the military. The next day, he filmed a second video saying he had not meant any of it and someone had told him to make the first video. The day after that, he was arrested. He is now, according to reports, in detention. Whatever actually happened to him inside that basement, the episode reveals the pressure building inside Russia's own military ranks. This is not an isolated voice. Russian military bloggers, the pro-war Telegram commentators with millions of followers who have been Putin's most reliable propagandists throughout this conflict, have started asking openly who is feeding Putin accurate information and why the official narrative sounds so disconnected from what they are observing. The economic picture is clear enough from these independent data points alone. Contraction, collapsing energy revenue, a melting reserve fund, double-digit inflation, a 16.5% interest rate, export bans on the country's primary export commodity, and a growing cascade of supply chain failures that now reach from Moscow gas stations to Russian farmland to Russian airline gates. Putin's teleprompter told him everything was only 4% worse than last year. The 140 million people trying to fill their tanks know better. So what happens next? With a 40-day Ukrainian siege underway, with fuel shortages spreading across 2/3 of Russia's territory, with Putin personally promising to fix a crisis his own televised statements suggest he does not fully understand, with Russian citizens openly questioning the war and gas lines, while Russian military veterans film themselves threatening uprisings before disappearing into detention, where does this story go? The first thing to understand is that Ukraine is not done, not even close. Zelensky's 40-day pressure operation, which launched on June 25th, runs through August 4th. As of today, the campaign is barely past its first week. Ukrainian officials have described everything seen so far: the 12-region simultaneous strikes, the Moscow refinery fires, the Crimea state of emergency, the Slavyansk inferno, as the opening phase. The early moves on the board. The first trailer for what comes next. Ukraine's drone production has been scaling at a pace that Russia's air defense consumption cannot match. In January, Russia claimed to have intercepted 3,676 Ukrainian drones. In May, that number had grown to 8,849 in a single month. That is a 2.5 times increase in just a few months, and the trend line points upward, not down. Zelensky has an arsenal that includes domestically produced Flamingo cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 900 kilometers, Polyanitsia and Peklo rocket drones, Western-supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and ATACMS ballistic missiles. He also has an intelligence apparatus that has demonstrated the ability to locate, track, and strike targets across 12 Russian regions simultaneously on a single night. This is not a one-time capability. It is a repeatable, scalable campaign. The Crimea angle deserves special attention because it is where the pressure is most concentrated and most visible. Every bridge of military value in Crimea has now been struck. Every air defense system near the Kerch Strait has been degraded or destroyed. Power plants and electrical substations across the peninsula have been hit, leaving significant portions of Crimea without electricity. Fuel sales to civilians have been completely halted. The Russian-installed state of emergency is in effect. And here is the cascading problem for Russia. You cannot repair damaged infrastructure in Crimea when the repair vehicles cannot get diesel to drive to the sites. You cannot replace blown bridges when the cranes and equipment needed to do the work are also fuel-dependent. The siege of Crimea is self-reinforcing in a way that makes Russian recovery from each individual strike more difficult than the last. Lukashenko's position adds another dimension to the geopolitical picture. He traveled to Putin's private Valdai residence for talks that produced no public photographs, no public statement, and no public outcome, which in the world of Russian state media is itself a kind of statement. He then flew directly to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. The trajectory of those two meetings tells its own story. Lukashenko is being squeezed by Putin to bring Belarus formally into the war. Belarus shares a border with Ukraine's north, and reopening a northern front would force Ukraine to divert significant forces away from the south and east. Lukashenko appears to be resisting, and reports suggest he used the Beijing visit to appeal to China to keep him out of direct military involvement. Whether that appeal succeeds may determine whether this war expands geographically in the weeks to come. Zelensky has also reportedly used Lukashenko as a potential back channel for peace proposals, according to a Ukrainian presidential office source, though this has not been independently confirmed. The idea that the dictator of Belarus could serve as a conduit between Kyiv and Moscow is strange enough to be almost darkly comic, but in a war that has already produced 4.5 years of unlikely developments, it is not implausible. The three conditions that will determine whether this siege produces a genuine breakthrough or simply becomes another dramatic chapter in an unresolved conflict are the same ones analysts have been watching throughout this campaign. First, whether Western support for Ukraine holds at the intensity needed to keep the drone production pipeline and intelligence infrastructure functioning through August and beyond. G7 commitments and anticipated NATO summit decisions in early July will be critical data points. Second, whether the domestic pressure building inside Russia, the gas lines, the angry conversations, the military bloggers asking questions, the veterans filming threats from basements, reaches a threshold that the Kremlin's information control apparatus can no longer absorb and reframe. Third, whether Ukraine itself can sustain this tempo without its own production capacity and international backing beginning to erode. Putin's path out of all of this exists, but requires something he has so far been constitutionally unable to do. He could agree to halt missile and drone strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure in exchange for Ukraine halting strikes on Russian refineries. Ukraine has said directly that such a deal is on the table. Putin rejected it. His stated reason was that accepting would signal weakness. That calculation, pride over people, is costing his country gasoline, costing his soldiers air defense coverage, costing his economy half its energy revenue, and costing ordinary Russians the ability to fill their cars or heat their food. 140 million Russians are screaming for gasoline right now. Some are screaming at empty pumps. Some are screaming at each other in fistfights by the nozzle. Some are screaming into blocked social media apps, hoping someone somewhere can hear them. And at least a few, in gas lines across a dozen regions, are beginning to ask the question out loud that Putin has spent 5 years making it illegal to ask. Was any of this worth it? The answer to that question, whenever enough Russians reach it simultaneously, is the answer that ends this war. Ukraine is working every single night to make that moment arrive faster than Putin can prevent it. The pumps are dry, the fires are burning, and there are still more than 30 days left on the clock.